Letter to a Narcissist by Dana Elizabeth, Part 2. Please take a moment, like, and subscribe before we begin. Their children were all out of the nest now, so the distractions were no longer available. Tanya didn't want to think of her children as distractions, but as each new year approached and they were getting older and more independent, she realized that she was utilizing her bond with her children in that light. Having responsibilities outside of Stanley helped her stay distracted from the facts and her true feelings. Along with the children, they both also used their vices, alcohol and drugs. It all started out on a recreational level, but quickly grew into a habit neither of them were ready to discuss. On a typical weekend, the vices only added to the fuel. The fire between Stanley and Tanya was growing out of control, but they intentionally ignored the flames. Occasionally smothering the fire, but as soon as a new incident occurred, the flames just erupted again. Stanley was really good at sweeping issues under the rug, as Tanya was his follower. She knew she wasn't happy. She knew their love was toxic, and more importantly, she knew their empire was built on a faulty foundation. A foundation that would eventually fall at the slightest chance of an earthquake or any natural disaster. The relationship between the two couldn't withstand any more because it was already too much pressure. This girls' trip was definitely not the answer, but maybe it was. Tanya was going back and forth in her head about going because financially she knew better. She always kept the nest egg just in case her house of falling cards came collapsing down. She had even been looking at properties and entertaining the idea of living away from Stanley once and for all. As the days passed her, it became hard to think. Stanley was always needing or wanting something, acting as if Tanya was his personal assistant. Yes, she was a stay-at-home mother, but since the children had left, she began to enter a new era in her life. She had entered an era where she could focus on herself and her dreams, and Stanley was doing any and everything in his power to block her new beginnings. He knew that any new change could spark a sense of confidence that Tanya was lacking. She depended on him for everything. She damn near let him think for her, and his ego loved every moment of it. Amanda was a close friend for many years, and she was well aware of the nature of the relationship, which is why she initially joined in on the plans for the girls' trip. She knew Tanya needed a break from Stanley. Amanda would tell her, "You two aren't even married. Why do you allow him to treat you as if you're not an equal?" Tanya couldn't and wouldn't answer the question because she didn't agree with Amanda's views. She knew Stanley treated her poorly, but she didn't feel like she wasn't his equal. In her mind, they had built this whole life together, and they were a team. Deep down in Tanya's mind, she knew the team was distorted. In fact, the team was downright dysfunctional. There was no balance or fairness. Stanley went through life making messes while Tanya cleaned them up. They smiled for photos as they post their annual vacations with the children. They looked happy from the outside looking in, but it was all a facade, and everyone knew. "Be quiet. You sound like a damn giant stomping around in there," Stanley screamed as Tanya was racing through the house getting her last-minute items packed in her bags before she left for the airport. Tanya heard him, but she didn't even acknowledge the snide remarks because she knew him, and she knew this was his way of starting an argument that would end badly. This was his pattern whenever she wanted to do something for herself. He would cause a huge scene about nothing, and in the past, she would fold like a daily newspaper. Tanya knew to just stay quiet, and if she wanted to get out of that house. Tanya knew to just stay quiet if she wanted to get out of the house. And once at the airport on time with no distraction. Tanya knew to just stay quiet if she wanted to get out of the house and to the airport on time with no distractions. He's such an idiot, she mumbled under her breath. Tanya had already scheduled with a taxi service the day before, and they were sending text updates to her phone as they were en route to pick her up. She grabbed her suitcase, purse, and phone charger. As she was exiting the door, she stopped and looked at herself in the mirror, filled with anxiety. She stood there and stared at her voluptuous body, draped in a casual maxi dress with sleeves. Her hair was freshly braided in a traditional cornrow style. Her face was clean and free from any makeup, just her beauty lotion. Tanya winked at herself and said, "Girl, you're beautiful and you got this." Positive self-talk was a skill she had been implementing in her life lately. It was a way to remind herself that she was not the negative things that Stanley called her. She knew she was beautiful and talented, and reminded herself of that daily. As she walked away from the mirror and closer to the front door, she could see the taxi approach in her driveway. The excitement began to build as she knew she was heading to a new experience on another continent. The flight was 15 hours, and she purposely booked a different flight from Amanda and the entourage. Tanya knew she needed to reflect on this trip and use the alone time effectively. Leaving out of her front door, she didn't even think about saying goodbye to Stanley, and he didn't see her off either. He was so toxic, and he rarely had anything positive to say, so she just exited with her piece. Tanya packed light, so there were only 2 suitcases for a 10-day vacation, so he thought. And she was okay with that. She figured that whatever she may need while on the island, she could buy there. At least that was her philosophy at the time. The taxi driver was so nice. He opened the door and quickly loaded the trunk. The destination was the airport. The ride along the way was fairly quiet. It was very early still, only 6:30 a.m., and the driver was busy navigating through the airport traffic. Although Stanley had nothing positive to say while Tanya was there, he definitely found the words once she left. He texted her phone a whole paragraph. Tanya rolled her eyes as she got the text notification and saw his name. What the hell does he want? She thought to herself, seeing how long the text was. She just deleted it because she knew how negative he was, and she didn't want his bad energy to ruin any part of her new experience. In fact, she blocked him and told herself if he asked why he couldn't get through, she would just tell him that her phone was on airplane mode. Tanya genuinely despised wasting her energy, lying, and always trying to be on defense with Stanley, but this was the life that she had decided to live. Some would think it would just be easier to leave him, and in some cases that is correct. However, the fact still remains that everyone is different. No 2 people process things exactly the same. There are many different solutions to problems, and at this present time, this solution worked best for Tanya. Thank you. For more short stories, please like, subscribe, and comment.